Good morning. It's nice to be here with you today. As a writer of nonfiction, I am much more accustomed to speaking about and delving into the lives of other people, but I thought I would start today by telling you a little bit about myself. I am the author of 5 books. However Long the Night is my first solo project. My 4 others are books that I co-authored, which means that I have the job of writing the stories of very interesting people. I've written books with Elizabeth Edwards and John Kerry back when he was just a senator, and Iranian Newsweek journalist Maziar Bahari. And if there's any Daily Show fans in the room, you may know that that book is currently being made into a feature film by Jon Stewart, which is exciting. And I know nothing about the project really, but I had a weird dream last night that they called to tell me that they had decided that the movie was going to be a musical, and that and the role of Maziar Bahari, who's an Iranian man, was going to be played by Carol Burnett. So we'll see what happens with that. But I came to this project with a fair bit of good luck and good timing. The focus of my work for the last several years has been on exploring the issues of the rights of girls and women, especially in the developing world. And I've traveled extensively to look at the state of women, from the brothels of Cambodia to the rice fields of Indonesia. And a couple years ago, I read Half the Sky by Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Dewan. And in that book, they mention, I don't think this is working. They mention, sorry, that's not working. They mention a woman named Molly Melching, who in 1974, when she was a graduate student in Illinois, she decided to go study for a semester at the University of Dakar. Well, she fell in love with the country, and she decided to stay. And in 1991, she started an organization named Toast On. And the purpose of Toast On is to bring education to girls and women in rural Senegal. And her approach to this education was highly innovative, because unlike other literacy projects which focus on teaching math and reading and rote memorization, the entire basis of Molly's schools was about bringing women an understanding of human rights. This is unique because in rural Senegal, as in many parts of the developing world, girls are taught that they don't have any rights. They are taught to be obedient and submissive, to not voice their opinion. They're taught to accept physical violence, most often at the hands of their husbands. If there is money for schools, that money is usually reserved to send one son and never the daughters. But Molly wanted to teach them something else. She wanted to teach them that every person, that every man, child, and even every woman had the right and deserved basic human rights. They had the right to be educated. In Senegal, they had the right to vote. They have the right to take part in making decisions for their community and family. And most of all, they had the right to live a life free from all forms of violence. Now, as Kristof and Dewan write in the book, something extraordinary and wholly unexpected was happening from this education they were receiving. Thank you. Women were coming together to declare an end to female genital cutting. Well, it was about this time that I received a call from HarperCollins, and they said that they were interested in perhaps publishing a book about Molly Melching, and was I interested in writing it. So as some of you who I'm sure are familiar with publishing in this room know, it's unusual that you get a call from a major publisher saying, would you like to write your dream book without having to do any work to pitch it to us? So I felt honored and lucky, although I do have to say that there were many times during the 2 years that I was in Senegal exploring this topic that I thought that perhaps they really had called hundreds of writers and said, do you want to try and take a book about female genital cutting and make it uplifting and wildly popular? And that I was the only one who actually said yes. But soon after that, I met Molly Melching, and I knew immediately that I wanted to tell her story. I believe that her story is really about nothing less than one of the most significant human rights movements that's happening on Earth today. And it's a story that begins many ways here in the small village of Malakunda Bambara in July of 1997. Now this is Kercho and her mother, Maimuna. They were part of the Toast On class in Malakunda Bambara, and they were learning about women's health. Toast On is a 3-year program, and it was in the second year of their program that they started this series of classes. And they were learning about how the systems of the body work, reproductive health, how and why women get pregnant, and this was all news to them. Well, Molly had recently made the decision to include in this discussion some talk about female genital cutting. Now, this was highly unusual and really quite risky. FGC is practiced in 29 countries worldwide, and the custom is one of the most critical moments in a girl's life. It prepares her for marriage, to be an accepted member of her community. To not cut one's daughter would really be unthinkable. It would set her up for a future of failure and social isolation. But the tradition is also not discussed. It's considered too intimate and too private to really talk about, and it's certainly never discussed with men. What women didn't understand was that the procedure led to problems. Even though so many of them had seen their daughters suffer, some had even watched their own daughters die, they didn't make a connection between the procedure and these problems, but they rather explained it away as bad luck or evil spirits. Well, Molly was not the first person to broach the subject of FGC with these women, but her approach was different. She didn't come into their village and call the act barbaric. She didn't use the word mutilation. She didn't judge these women or accuse them of not loving their daughters. She simply wanted to help them understand the things that they didn't, that the procedure could harm girls, and that every one of them had the right to live without harm. Her goal was to get them talking, and they did. Well, what happened next was truly unbelievable. On July 31st, 1997, the 35 women of the Toast On class, with the support of their community, invited journalists and government representatives to their small village to tell them of the decision that they had made after many long months of discussion. And here's what happened. Maimuna greeted the guests, and when she had finished, her daughter Kerto stood to speak. We once believed the tradition to be a religious obligation, but we now know it's not, she said. We once believed it caused no health problems, and we now know it does. As women, we once believed we had no choice but to continue the practice. We now know we have the right to question any practice that brings harm or health to our community. We've made the decision to abandon this practice together, and we are proud of the choice we have made. When Kerto finished speaking, Maimuna stood again and walked slowly to the center of the circle. With her shoulders held back, her head lifted high, she said the words Molly knew she had been quietly rehearsing for weeks. From this day forward, we, the women of Malakunda Bambara, pledge that none of our daughters and none of our daughters' daughters will be cut. We stand by our decision, and we've invited you so that we may finally break through the silence, to publicly say no, to choose health and well-being for all of our daughters and granddaughters. As Maimuna spoke, Molly felt the breath catch in her throat. She looked around the circle of chairs at the women of the Toast On class gathered under the large neem tree, perfectly aware of the significance of these words and of the fact that these 35 mothers had the courage to become the first African women to stand up publicly and break a centuries-old silence. Well, the decision was brave, but it was not well received. The women were called revolutionaries. They were accused of turning their backs on tradition. They began to question their choice to go public, and they feared that their courage would never be recognized. But then, several weeks later, Molly was invited to another village where the Toast On classes on health were taking place. And here she was told that the women were choosing to follow in the footsteps of the women of Malakunda Bambara. They, too, were abandoning the tradition. A few months later, more journalists were invited to the small village of Diabugu, where, amazingly, 13 villages came together to jointly abandon the practice. This one decision affected the future of more than 8,000 girls. Then 2 months later, another public declaration, this one representing 18 villages and impacting more than 15,000 girls. Now, I don't want to give the whole book away, but it continues to get good. Week after week, Molly continued to get calls from women in Toast On classes. Not only were they declaring an end to FGC, but now, with their understanding of human rights, they were also breaking their silence and declaring an end to other harmful traditions, like domestic violence and child marriage. Women were registering to vote. A few even called her to ask her how they might run for mayor of their village. As I write, none of this was easy for Molly, who at the time was the single mother of a young girl. She was often threatened with death. On more than one occasion, she was run out of town. She'd wake up in the morning to find her car had been vandalized and her offices broken into, but she is determined and stubborn. She kept bringing her message of hope and human rights to girls and women, and she opened up hundreds of more Tostan classes throughout Senegal. The results are truly extraordinary. Today, more than 7,000 villages have done what those 35 women were the first to do 17 years ago, publicly pledge an end to the practice. In 2010, the government of Senegal adopted a national plan of action to end FGC by using Tostan's human rights-based approach. And the nation is now well on its way to, within 3 years, likely becoming the first nation where the custom is no longer practiced. Molly is not done. She's brought the Tostan program to 7 other African nations. Most impressive, I think, to Somalia, where it's largely considered to be the worst place in the world to be a woman. But today, 34 public declarations have taken place even there. And so have 58 in the Gambia, 43 in Guinea-Bissau, 332 in Guinea, and now 7 in Mali. What is most interesting about Molly's story, I think, and what's most exciting about the idea of introducing her to college-age students, is not necessarily the story of ending FGC in Senegal, though that's interesting, but I really think it's what Molly's approach teaches us about the very nature of development. I've spent a fair amount of time over the last several years thinking about development in the third world, and I could say with a lot of confidence that I really think that Molly may have figured out the key to how we should do it. She shows us there's no quick fix to big problems. There's no easy answers. We can't just throw money at problems and expect that they're going to go away or tell people what to do. Real solutions to problems, and not just FGC, but child marriage and gender inequality, even illiteracy and poverty, they require a deep understanding and a true respect for local culture and customs. She teaches us that true change will come only if the people themselves are armed with knowledge and understanding, and most of all, a belief that they themselves can create the change that they desire. I'm always particularly happy, when any reader reaches out, but I got an email a couple weeks ago from a college student who is also a young man that I found particularly moving. I thought I was buying a book about a social movement in Senegal, but I can't stop thinking about how we might apply Molly's lessons here, because this is not a story about the human rights and potential of people in Africa. This is a story about the human rights and potential of people everywhere, even right here in America. Thank you.